Well, the Liberal government's political fortunes appear to be going from bad to worse. At least that's a suggestion from some new polling. David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data, and he joins me now. David, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Good to see you, David.
All right, let's start with the top line numbers. We're not going to see a massive shift or a lot of news in this, but it continues the trend when we showed here. The Conservatives, look, they're way out in front, more than the Liberals and the NDP combined. When you look at that next tier of political parties, you've got the Bloc Québécois and you've got the Green all the way back at 8% and 5%. But it's really that top line number of Conservatives, 43%, big majority territory. What's your takeaway from where the data has been now for a year?
Yeah, well, I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of change for a year. We've seen this narrow band anywhere between 18 to 22%. 22% is the largest lead we've had for the Conservatives, but it's more or less been there for quite some time. But you're right. When you start to combine, and when you combine the Liberals and the New Democrat number, and it's still lower than that Conservative number, we are in massive majority government territory for the Conservatives.
This is north of 200 seats.
Yeah, and there appears to be, at least right now, no indication in the polling that I'm doing that the bulk of those people who are saying I'd vote Conservative today are even open to maybe changing their mind. So there's this firming up as well that I think if you're either the Liberals or the New Democrats or anyone else who's trying to compete with the Conservatives, you need to be worried about.
Okay, so it's a mile wide, but it's more than an inch deep at this point. It's consolidated and stabilized. Okay, the news is not so much the top line number. I want to look at this as the polling you did where you separate out Quebec and you look at the voting in the rest of Canada. And here's the news in this. The Conservatives are at 50% when you exclude Quebec, and the NDP move into second place ahead of the Liberals. What's driving that?
Well, I think a few things are happening. One, the New Democrats have really established themselves as the alternative to the Liberals in Western Canada, whether you're talking about the prairies, where the Liberals have been, other than in maybe Winnipeg, have really been nowhere for quite some time, but also in British Columbia, where we've seen the Liberals over the last number of months continue to see their vote deteriorate. Maybe that's the result of the polarization caused by the provincial election in British Columbia, but that New Democrat number is being pushed up in Western Canada, which has helped them, at the same time that the Liberal number in Ontario and Atlantic Canada continues to deteriorate. So the result is, outside of Quebec, you now have the New Democrats ahead of the Liberals, and you also have the Conservatives at a point in terms of vote share where Stephen Harper was polling outside of Quebec just before he won a majority government in 2011. So there's indicators here of the fact that Quebec is not solid for either the Liberals or the New Democrats this time, but the Conservatives are basically making the rest of the country blue. Okay,
a question about the NDP number, because you mentioned what's happening in British Columbia, where David Eby is in the middle of an election campaign to sustain government. There's an election in Saskatchewan where the NDP are better than they were last time round. Could that be part of what's driving the numbers on the prairies? Like it may not translate into a whole lot of seats for the NDP. It may just change the poll numbers.
I think we have to, you're right, we have to do maybe put an asterisk there that this could be a temporary lift that these provincial elections are getting. I mean, when we saw it when Rachel Notley won for the New Democrats in Alberta in 2015, that did give a lift to the New Democrats nationally, but certainly in the prairies. So I think that could be playing into it. Now, that could be a long-term benefit if the New Democrats in Saskatchewan do better than we thought they would. That might give the New Democrats a place there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win seats there because they are still so far behind the Conservatives. We're basically just looking at national numbers that ultimately mean very little to what the House of Commons looks like.
Right, and of course, in Quebec, it is the Bloc at number 1, the Liberals at number 2, and the Conservatives at number 3 right now, Quebec. Okay, so I want to look at a couple of issues, because the Conservatives with 50%, outside of Quebec, over 40% when you include Quebec, but you pulled a series of issues that could be vulnerabilities for them. So I just want to go through some of those. You had a look at dental care. 49% of Canadians think the Conservatives will eliminate the national dental care program. You also looked at national child care. 45% think the Conservatives will eliminate that. You talked about climate change. Only 34% think the Conservatives will take climate change seriously. And as a final one, 44% of Canadians think the Conservatives will make it harder to get an abortion. Dental care, child care, climate change, and abortion. I hear the Liberals talking about that almost every day, certainly on their social media. What kind of a challenge does that sentiment create for the Conservatives?
Well, the first thing is those first two you showed on child care and dental care, those numbers are up from when we asked in December of last year. So the way to think about that is more and more Canadians are believing. These are perceptions. These are what they believe a Conservative government would do if they're elected.
Right.
those are negatives if you're the Conservatives. Those are vulnerabilities. They're starting to rise, right? On the issue of climate change, on abortion, those numbers aren't moving, but there are far, far more Canadians who say, well, I think some of them think they might do it. The vast majority do not want them to. That's why these are what I call those ultimate shield issues that they do not want to talk about. And if perceptions increase that they might do these things, then it becomes something that actually might prevent somebody who right now says they're going to vote Conservative, might prevent them from doing it because they don't want them to.
But in terms of pulling voters away from the Conservatives to help the other parties, the NDP, the Liberals, the Bloc on climate, certainly, and on abortion, there's a lot of options on the progressive side of the ballot, right? So how would it need to consolidate these concerns for it to matter?
Well, you need consolidation, right? Mm-hmm. And you saw when our first slide that showed the NDP and the Liberals, basically tied nationally. They're splitting right now the progressive vote. And if you add the Bloc and the Greens, well, there you go. You've got close to 40% of Canadians who are voting for a party that more or less is diametrically opposed to the Conservative agenda, but there's no one consolidating it. And I think that's going to be hard to do if you're the Liberals, if Justin Trudeau remains leader. And the New Democrats have always had trouble pulling some Liberals over who may not ever vote New Democrats. So that consolidation, that splitting of the vote on the left, is now giving the Conservatives a really easy ride.
Well, just on that, as a quick final point, I mean, a lot of New Democrats may fist pump, say, yes, unspooling from the supply and confidence agreement, a good move for us. We've moved ahead of the Liberals. But if you're the Conservatives, you love this, because this kind of shattered, political dynamic on the other side, that just turns maybe marginal seats into wins for the Conservatives.
Let's look what happened to the UK Labour Party, who got way less of the vote than the Conservatives projected to get today, but won a massive majority because that opposition to them was just shattered away. So I think this is as good as it gets, a scenario for the Conservatives, because then they start to win seats in Toronto, in Montreal, like we saw in those by-elections this summer. And it becomes hard for anyone to figure out, well, who's the alternative in that case.
All right. David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data, thanks for walking us through it.
You're welcome.
Okay, those numbers show an interesting portrait of the current political landscape, and we're going to talk about that with the Power Panel. Rob Russo is the former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief. He's now the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Brad Levine is a former Communications Director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all. Happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. Vandana, I don't know if those numbers started your week off on a happy note. Just what are your thoughts on we're seeing there that the New Democrats conceivably ahead of the Liberals in what we'd call English Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I am someone who, I get polls sent to me every single day. And
yes.
People ask me what I think about them. I'm someone who really thinks the polls are a good way to send a message to political parties, a good way to read what the voter is thinking. But I don't really read into polls on terms of who are they going to actually vote for until the election period.
Right.
A couple things that are being up against. Today I saw a number of times the Pierre Poilievre ad over and over again, and both the ones that I've seen. So that does make an imprint on people. I would say progressives are looking to figure out where to park their vote. I think, people know that life is hard. They feel it. They want a change in their circumstances in terms of affordability and the cost of living. But I also think when you look at those numbers that Coletto shared, is that they still have progressive values. They still want action on environment, on childcare, on pharmacare, on dental care. So that really lets people wonder, progressive parties have to think about how do we define ourselves and how do we define ourselves past the other progressive parties out there. So I think that is something that the government has an opportunity to look at this and be like, okay, how do we define ourselves as still a progressive party that is as making news in these social issues that matter to people. I think the fear for the Conservative Party, though, is that, and the reason they probably won an election is that this is as good as it gets, as David Coletto said. The fear here is that you can lose that. Right? If you're up that high, it is scary to be like, ooh, we don't want anything chip away at that, right? So I think I understand that why.
So Brad, there is that set of issues that we sort of showed there at the end that David Coletto identified in his data as potential vulnerabilities, but the challenge for progressives is there's no single vehicle that people are rallying behind in defense of those issues. How do you see what the NDP in second in English Canada tells us?
Yeah. Well, there's no clear non-conservative option yet, and I think that what David's numbers are showing here is that outside of Quebec, the New Democratic Party at this stage is just a little bit ahead of the Liberals. One of the challenges that the Democrats have faced this, let's say we're at least 6 months, between 6 and 12 months away from the next election, is viability. That is, can they win? And when polls start showing that the New Democrats are like breaking away, let's say, or at least in a better position than being in third or fourth in the polls, that provides the viability option, and that's good news. That brings in money, that brings in enthusiasm, that attracts great candidates, and it gives the whole party some enthusiasm. What I also found interesting, and this is where I see some runway here for New Democrats, that is, when you take a look at some of David's numbers. Clearly, there is an appetite in this country for change away from the Liberals. Right now, while they're not enamored with Poilievre has to date been the most credible voice for change. That notion of change and not being in love with Poilievre provides, I think, Singh with an opportunity to actually say, I'm also a potential agent for change. Then you take a look at where Conservatives are getting their new support from. Young people, women, those who are really concerned about where they are today. Very, traditionally young people and women, those have been predominantly supporting New Democrat and Liberal parties in the past. Now they're supporting the Conservatives. But if you take a look at your issue set that you just ran through with David, that is dental care, pharmacare, choice on the matter of abortion, those are matters, and climate change. Those are matters where people think the Tories are going to go in the wrong way, but they don't want them to necessarily. Therefore, it suggests to me that there's an appetite for those policy issue sets to say, maybe I do want change from Trudeau, but it's certainly not necessarily going to have to be with Poilievre. It is now, but it doesn't have to be in months to come.
But Lisa, it's interesting when you look at this data and all the other data we've seen in the last couple of months, that younger Canadians, younger millennials and Gen Zs, they're going to vote more conservative than the baby boomers, which is not something I ever thought I'd see, but that's where the trend appears to be going based on this data.
Well, I think what you're seeing is a reaction to the fact that they have looked at the last 9 years and they feel like they're not getting ahead, so they're going to vote in the direction that they think is going to help them personally. I will say one thing, though, David, as I look at these numbers, the one thing that comes to my mind is we are at a tipping point in terms of whether or not there's a moral authority for the two progressive parties to be together in terms of governing the country. I know that they've ripped up the agreement, but the reality is now the Conservatives are pulling ahead of both of them combined. And that should be the clearest sign of all that it is time for an election. And I know that even my local MP here keeps telling people in the community, nobody wants an election. I think they do. And I think you're seeing the numbers put up in front of you. And I don't know whether or not a year is enough time for folks to go out and start scaring people from voting Conservative when they've got 9 years of a past that they have to explain as well.
There is some data here. I'm just looking for it. 32% want a federal election, according to this. They want it to happen as soon as possible, but 30% don't want an election to happen until its scheduled date on October 16th. 16% prefer an election to happen before the October 2025 date, but not before the end of this year, and the remaining 22% don't care. So it's really about a third that want the election ASAP. Another 16% that want it sometime after January 1, but before October, right? So in the new year. So,
Sure. So 46% want an election.
So it's 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but yes, I mean, there is an appetite for it, but Rob, it tends to break down directly along, whether the team you're cheering for seems like they're poised to win, right? So like, yes, if the outcome is going to be good for you, you want it ASAP. But what do you make of this realignment that we're seeing potentially, outside of Quebec? I don't know if it's being juiced a little bit, as I talked about with David, like by what's happening in Saskatchewan, by what's happening in BC and different things, but it is a shift in a way that is not what the Liberals wanted to see this fall.
I'm not entirely sure that's true. If I look at the NDP number at 19%, that's pretty much what they've been for the last several years. As you know, David, during our time working together, I do consider a lot of the polling that's done outside of a writ period, based on a writ period question, to be worthy of incontinent canines when it comes to polls. So I do, though, think that after a year, it is absolutely clear that Canadians are looking for hope, and they don't see it in the Prime Minister, and they don't see it in the Liberal Party. It's absolutely clear as well that a lot of Liberals who had developed blisters from pushing the panic button have now got calluses on those fingers that they're pushing the panic button with. Why? I mean, just look at what happened over the weekend. The Conservatives released a brand new ad. It was a kind of a Morning in Canada ad. Pierre Poilievre and his wife in the middle of a field. They somehow found a flagpole in the middle of a field and hoisted a Canadian flag. It was a lovely thing, all over Facebook. And in terms of what the parties are spending on Facebook, the Conservatives are steamrolling the other parties with their financial advantage. So the Liberals aren't in the game in terms of advertising. And I don't know if they're in the game at all in terms of campaigning. They don't have a campaign manager, even though we could be in an election at almost any moment. So if you're a Liberal and you didn't think things could get worse, you were wrong. They could get worse.
Right. So just to pick up, okay, your incontinent canine reference, which the National would never let me put into a script, despite your prodding. But you are seeing some stuff in this data where there's anxiety, maybe, on the policies like childcare, dental care, climate, reproductive rights. You did see an Angus Reid survey recently that talked about concerns about Poilievre's agenda. What do you draw from that, Rob, when you look at that data? Is there anything there that the panicked Liberals can turn to and use politically?
You know, last week I was wondering why Mr. Poilievre was being so insulting, if not humiliating, opposition leaders that he would have to work with to bring the government down. And I asked a few Conservatives about that, and they said basically we don't need the opposition leaders. We believe we're going to win and win big without them. Sooner or later, it'll be in their interest to bring the government down, and when that happens, we're going to win big. There is some overconfidence, but those numbers showing, yes, that there is a great deal of concern about issues like childcare, like dental care, notwithstanding them, 43% of Canadians are still prepared to vote for Conservatives and deliver them a massive majority government if those polling numbers hold. Yes, there's something to hang on to, but it doesn't matter what the Liberals seem to be saying. As long as it comes through the lips of Mr. Trudeau, it seems, Canadians aren't listening. They're looking for hope. Without a doubt, they are looking for hope. Right. And the reality is neither Mr. Trudeau nor Mr. Poilievre are going to be able to deliver hope in a timely manner on the issue that matters to them most, I think, which is affordable housing. But right now, they want, it seems, to give somebody other than Mr. Trudeau that chance.
So Vandana, with all of this laid out in front of us, and with, the Parliament back in session and confidence vote after confidence vote after confidence vote, there's going to be another one this week, I believe. I mean, what do you do? What does your team do from this point? Because nothing seems to be moving, is the challenge for our government stuck right now.
The one thing I will say that seems to be working is that if people are believing that Pierre Poilievre will cut childcare or dental care or pharmacare or even abortion, and that one actually surprised me. And
they've all moved up slightly.
Yes, exactly. So that actually all surprised me, because I will say what the government is good at doing is sharing what Pierre Poilievre may do. Right? And what is he going to cut? He's going to cut this. He might cut that. He's going to make it. I mean, all weekend I saw there's like a National Healthy Abortion Day or something, and it was all over my social media, just the same message over and over again. So I think in that sense, that is one piece that they can keep doing to show Canadians and put doubt in their mind that Pierre Poilievre will cut these things, because people want these things. They like them. Once they have nice things, they don't want to be taken away from them, right? But the other thing they need to do on the flip side is drive. What are we also going to do for you? It's one thing to define what is he not going to do for you, but you also to share what are we going to do for you. So I think showing progress on things like housing, on the cost of living, on pocketbook issues. And I think for young people, I find young people more disillusioned than ever. like life's hard. There's a great Chio ad right now saying that kids have more at them than any other time. And I agree with that. There's a lot of anxiety in kids on climate. My daughter is 7 years old, and she is worried about climate change. And, she's very stressed about residential survivors. But I think these are things that you still need to connect back to your grassroots and go back to 2015 and connect to women and connect to young people and punch above your weight and be innovative and really be that grassroots party. And I think that's what they have to go back to.
Brad, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is there space there in the data on, where people are a bit anxious about what the frontrunner might do for them to make the move? Because it's tough to drive a message when people seemingly aren't interested in the messenger.
That's right. So you have to make it about the other person that's currently leading in the polls. So you have to make it about him. And if you go back to David Coletto's numbers, again, while Poilievre's got the most support in terms of votes, people are not enamored with him. And one of I think the biggest mistakes, and I wish the New Democrats did this as well, is that when Poilievre took over the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, neither the Liberals nor the New Democrats did an adequate job in terms of helping define him. That is, taking away the things that you want, that he's out of step with the values that the majority of Canadians want to see. And letting the pitch go by without a swing has led Poilievre to define himself. He's got quite the social media presence in this country, so he's using it. You mentioned that he's spending a lot of money on Facebook. Well, looking at Coletto's numbers, they should be spending it on Instagram as opposed to Facebook, because the older generations are on Facebook. So maybe they've got so much money that they don't care if they're sending the signal to the wrong place. But that was the biggest mistake. And now there's very little time to do that. So now what you have to do is you have to see if there's enough runway to define him. This is what Singh was trying to get out of the supply and confidence agreement with, so that he could take on the Conservatives. This is obviously going to be a good piece of news that they're going to use to leverage, fundraise, and get out there and make the fight between New Democrats and Conservatives, diabolically opposed values, to let the Canadians decide which ones. Because Trudeau's brand is so toxic right now that no matter what he says, I don't think anybody who's not still with the Liberals is going to be open to hearing it.
So, Lisa, this argument that they need to get out there and run some ads and define and reshape public opinion on Pierre Poilievre. And we've seen, a not so successful example of that, with your party and Trudeau in 2015 with the nice hair, and he's just not ready, and he won. But prior to that, Michael Ignatieff, he didn't come back for you, was a withering evisceration of the Liberal leader. Poilievre's been in there a long time now, and is it too late to get into it now to try to define him, or is there still time and runway should the Liberals and the NDP find the cash and a clear campaign to go at him on?
So I don't know if it's for me to tell them if it's too late or not, because I think that's the only choice that they have left. That's what they're going to have to do, is demonize the other side in order to boost their own numbers if it's possible. And that's kind of the well-trod path I think that we've seen in the past, and that we're going to see going forward. It's very interesting to me, though, that what it comes down to is whether or not people are going to feel comfortable with respect to their economic situation. And don't forget, 3.5 million Canadians are going to be renewing their mortgages by March of next year, and that's a real number. That's a big number.
Right, but the interest rates have started to dip down, and should go down again between now and March, right?
But it's not going to be 1.6.
No.
They're still going to be looking at doubling of their interest rate. I mean, I know we're trying to say it's going to be better off, but it's not for them, because when you locked into a 5-year rate back in 2021, you're probably getting 1.4, 1.5. I mean, anywhere near 4 or 5 is going to be a big shock to your system. And that is a pocketbook issue, if there's anything, because your mortgage is your biggest expense.
Yes, I got locked in. I renewed at just over 5 a year ago, so I'm feeling that pain quite substantially, because I was just timing was bad for me. So, Rob, on the defining of Poilievre, that Brad outlined, in which you do hear Liberals lament that they haven't done it. I mean, is there reasonably enough time for them to mount the sort of critical mass advertising they would need to do to shift an opinion against the Conservatives so profoundly at this point in time?
It depends on who's delivering the message and how the message is delivered. I think really their only hope, as long as Mr. Trudeau remains the leader, is that Mr. Poilievre himself degrades his own appeal to voters. And I think the wise Conservatives who advise Mr. Poilievre there are some of them who are concerned about that. There is not a great deal of love for Mr. Poilievre. There isn't a great deal of affection for him. But I think that people are so scarred by what they've endured through the pandemic that they might clearly they seem right now willing to put that aside. Is there vote parking going on with the Conservatives? A lot of Conservatives believe that there is some of that. But in terms of actually degrading substantially his support, Mr. Trudeau is probably incapable of doing that. Mr. Poilievre might be able to do that. That is the most fervent hope of Liberals.
Vandana, last word to you. Is it a combo of your crowd getting better at bringing him down and him messing up, or what do you think?
I think it's a number of things. I think it's a mix of that. You have to define him, but also define the issues that you're going to bring to Canadians, what you can do for them, but also really drive that contrast between them and the progressive parties.
Okay, all right, we got to...
David?
Yes.
David, I just want to say one last thing. That poll from Coletto also said that 60% of Canadians want Poilievre to get rid of the carbon tax.
Yes.
And that's one thing that NDP and Liberals aren't budging on. So they've got a hurdle to go over as well to get these votes back.
Well, the NDP are budging on that. We just don't know where they're budging to. I promise we will talk about that when we find out where they land on that. But yes, in terms of the issue set, that builds on the affordability thing. That's 61%, I believe it is.
I think that whatever party does that has to share what they're going to do for the climate as well.
Yes, but the problem with that, for proponents of carbon pricing, is a bit like cutting the GST. Once you do it, politically, how do you bring it back? Should you get the opportunity? It's going to be a real inflection point on that particular thing.
Sure, and every party's going to have a clear plan that's going to show people how they're driving forward on the environment.
Yep, for sure.
They don't want taxes. They want their taxes cut. That's all I got to say.
All right. Well, that's what the poll also would suggest. All right. We got to leave it there. Brad Levine, Lisa Raitt, Rob Rousseau, Vandana Cotter, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dan.
And